I'm April Morley. I'm co-founder of Genius Drive and the Enterprise Value Collective.
And I'm Tom Pacello, the ROI guy.
This podcast is a service of the Enterprise Value Collective, a community for business value-focused leaders and practitioners, and is sponsored by our value consultancy, Genius Drive.
Our mission is to help accelerate and optimize value articulation in each of your customer engagements and throughout your customer lifecycle. And to help us with a great discussion today on sellers and the need to change their behavior is Tim Ohai. He's a veteran sales effectiveness leader, now an independent revenue growth architect and coach with his consultancy, Kupu Solutions. Welcome, Tim.
Hey, it's great to be here. Aloha.
Selling has definitely changed in this uncertain economy. And as a result, we need sellers to step up and adopt. We've given them new training, skills, but it doesn't seem like change is occurring the way that we want. Why do you think it's so difficult to get sellers to change?
I think it all boils down to what's the actual definition of the problem. When leaders go into their sales teams and we say, hey, we need you to do X or Y or Z, what they're really saying is we want you to hit your number. They're not really saying we want you to change how you sell, or we want to disrupt the flow of the business so that we can go from an old state to a new state. And then unfortunately, a lot of companies aren't even really trying to understand how their customers make buying decisions. Most of what they're trying to do is locked into this idea of how do we force people to do something, and I air quotes around something, so that we can get our numbers back on track. And so if you're not clear about what change is about, and you're not really clear on what your expectations are for what success looks like. And I mean, what's the outcome? What are the metrics, which includes hitting the number, but there's other things, and all the requirements. You're setting your team up for essentially failure, because you're just going to complain about whatever it is that they don't do that you didn't tell them you wanted them to do from the very beginning. And that's, to me, is the core issue. We're not really expecting change. We're just trying to yell at people, and we may do it in very nice ways, but the bottom line is it's not there to help them change how they sell. It's about them hitting a number.
Fair point, Tim. And so you said it's more about what we're being clear about in our communication, what we're asking them to do, what the problem is. So how do we better articulate the problem and motivate the team to reach the outcomes that we're looking for?
So if you think about, let's start with what are we expecting? Are we trying to simply optimize what's already in place, or are we trying to actually transform what we're doing? So when we say we want to transform the way we sell, we really want to sell value, we really want to do this thing differently, you're saying, as a leader, you're inviting disruption, because you cannot transform without disruption. And yet the moment the numbers dip, the moment things start getting wonky, the moment that performance isn't as predictable as your weekly forecast call wants it to be, people freak out and they start going, no, you got to go back. And they default back to the optimization where you're minimizing disruption, but you'll never optimize your way into a transformation. It just doesn't work that way. So you first and foremost have to define that scope and make sure every function, not just the team members, but every function is aligned to this. So if we're talking to marketing, hey, marketing, we're going to disrupt what we do so that we can transform in support of your strategy. If you're talking to value, hey, we're going to disrupt how these conversations go so that we can have different kinds of conversations. We're okay with that. But when I'm a seller, and I could be the frontline manager, I could be an individual contributor, I could even be the vice president of sales, and I want different conversations, and I'm getting pushback from other functions saying, you can't do it this way. You have to go back to the old way of doing it. We're not going to change the conversations. We'll default to what we used to do and get the same results we always have. Secondly, once we have that scope defined, we then need to be super, super, super clear about what success looks like. What is the outcome? What are the metrics? And what are the requirements? And if the outcome is defined as we want to hit a number, that's your metric. That's not your goal. We need to know if we're moving in the right direction, regardless of what the metric is telling us. So for example, we want market growth. The metric tells us what percentage of growth we're getting. If we want market penetration, if we want to displace a competitor, we got to know that that's what we're trying to do, so that marketing and value and sales and success and even finance and HR are aligned around executing that strategy around displacing a competitor. We may want to recruit from those people the best talent that they have. We may want to create customer events where we can measure, did we nudge them out of the way, or did we take the prime position? We may do deal analysis and look at how many deals we beat in comparison against that competitor. Even if the number's not quite where it was supposed to be, we're still making progress against our goal. And if you can do those two things, get your scope, lock down your goal clarity, you are going to find massive changes in what you're actually executing and the decisions that people make in order to achieve it.
Yeah. Tim, you used a word, and that was disruption. And I think that's sometimes how we approach the change process with sales is, look, the old way you were doing it absolutely doesn't work. And here's a brand new way in every way that we want you to learn and do and execute on. And I think there can sometimes be a mistake in that because there are sellers who are successful doing things the old way, and they will say, well, I'm hitting my numbers, I'm hitting my quota, why should I change? And the ones that maybe aren't doing it the way that we want and are not successful, they view this new initiative as just such a big change and such a big hill to climb that maybe they're not able to climb it effectively at all. So I'm wondering if just even the base approach that we're taking to this could be wrong. Like for me, I view value selling as you're not going to abandon a product approach, because you do have to demonstrate the product. You have to make sure it does what the customer wants and needs. There's going to be a technical evaluation. To me, value selling is an and, not an or, to the process. Yet I've seen programs get launched where it's like no, you got to completely abandon the old way. It doesn't work. And now here's another whole new way approach. Forget about product. It's all about value. Or forget about the solution-based approach we just taught you. It's all around MEDDIC or MEDPIC or whatever the new process or methodology might be. Talk about how we can maybe do a better job on that.
Well, so that's a huge question. There's actually a lot to unpack there. Let's go back to this idea that when I hear these kind of comments from senior leaders, what they're asking for is accountability. They want their people to be accountable for whatever it is that they're asking them to do. And whenever I hear I want accountability, I go, time out. Let's define accountability. Is accountability people have a number and they're exposed when they don't hit that number? That actually creates a fear-based culture, and people will not only hide from that kind of visibility, they'll actually generate bad information. The CRMs are notorious for being full of garbage because people have not put what's really in their pipe into the CRM because they don't want to be, quote, held accountable for what's in their CRM. So I always calibrate. Accountability is around full transparency that's voluntary. It's trust-based. So I will raise my hand when I'm not hitting my number or I need help because I'm not afraid of the consequence. And a lot of organizations say we want this change, but anybody who doesn't change gets bopped on the head every time they do something wrong. So people wind up hiding the change, or even better, they just don't do the change at all. But let's say we have the right definition of accountability, then the thing that you have to have before accountability is engagement. And that's what you were just going after as well, is this idea that I want to be personally connected and engaged with whatever the change is as a salesperson, so that I'm doing it because I believe not only is it the right thing for the company, I believe it's the right thing for me. So if compensation and all the other stuff doesn't tie into that engagement factor, I will not have accountability, period. But before you can have engagement, you have to have empowerment. I will not volunteer to put in all the extra time and effort if you haven't given me the people I need, the time I need, the energy I need, and the resources that I need. I use the acronym PETER, P-T-E-R. And the idea that I need to rely on other functions and other teammates to respond when I need their help, to answer questions to give me permission or give me information when I need to go to a customer with that. And if I don't have that, if I don't have the time to get it done, energy it goes back to both confidence and the skills and the training that you give me, but also just fatigue and fear and confusion. And I hear one thing one month and the next thing another month. And what's the priority? I don't know what it is. I'm not going to engage. And of course, resources gets into the money, the technology, the data, as well as just the physical space to do my work. And if you don't do those things, you will not have accountability. So you have to work this in a sequence and an order for the team to work. There is no easy button. And unfortunately, a lot of sales organizations, and I'll say this bluntly, especially in tech, and I'll throw in pharmaceutical as well, have developed this over-reliance on their technology or their innovation. And because it's so cool, they quietly expect it to sell itself. So sellers are almost this necessary evil. And if you just do it, it'll be great. And all of a sudden the numbers start to go soft, or you're not getting the growth that you expected out of it. You start pushing on the sellers, but at the end of the day, you haven't fully empowered them and engaged them to get them to be accountable for the strategy you're trying to execute. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You covered so many great topics there. So it's about accountability requires engagement, which also requires empowerment. So it really starts with, building that foundation of empowerment and a culture of trust. So how do you think that leaders can really start with that foundational empowerment and trust building to create the environment in which the team can be successful?
So this is where I go back to clarity. Clarity is your anchor. Now, clarity is an extension of culture. So the hard part here is that, do we go after culture first, and trust is one of those values that drives, or do we go after clarity first? And I'll say, look, I grew up in the ocean. So the idea of, when you are in a boat, you drop your anchor, you're only going to be able to drift so far from that anchor point. And culture is that anchor point. It will allow you to drift this far, that, and that's it. But you need to not move your anchor point first. Create clarity first. Get the scope, get the goal clarity, get the role clarity, and then I'll throw in the last one. Get your priorities locked. 1 is 1, 2 is 2, 3 is 3. Everything else sits outside of that. So when I come to you and say, hey, I need this report done, or hey, we got to do this extra new thing, or hey, I'm like, is that priority 1, 2, or 3? And if you're not clear to me, then whatever you allocate to me for resources as an empowerment, I may or may not even use, because I'm trying to go after what I think success is. So I always say, start with clarity, then you can do the empowerment, then the engagement, accountability, and over time, you will shift that culture. But that's, again, we're talking deep psychological kind of values that people operate with. And one of the ones I use all the time is that, in the absence of information, people create their own. So start with really clear expectations around that information and goals and roles and all that stuff. And you would be shocked at how much of this stuff just cleans up on its own. But if the information flow is one way, if it's not cross-functional, if it's not open and allows for people to truly speak their mind, then you're literally pulling the thread at the very beginning, and none of it's going to hang together, no matter what you try to do.
Yeah. You mentioned that in the absence of information, people create their own. I think one of the psychological things is, too, we think the worst.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So that need for survival is there. So in our minds, when there is a lack of information, we tend to be very fear-driven and survival-driven in light of it. And that gets in the way of change, right? It enacts a status quo bias.
That's so spot on. That's actually the anchor point for the coaching that I do, is how do we make sure you're not understanding how strategy execute, but you're also the person who has the mindset and the skill set in order to do this. And when we go to survival mode, you're right, it just goes negative. And we can justify it all day long of why it makes sense, of why we're doing what we're doing. And it all makes sense in our head. But to your point, Tom, it's a negative lens that everything is now being seen with, which limits the kind of decisions I make, limits the kind of conversations we have. And that's even before we get to the customer. This is all behind the scenes. This is all the stuff we're doing in our own team meetings and cross-functional meetings and other things. It turns into this really, really, and then we expect our sellers to show up positive and bright and happy and ready to be brand ambassadors. And we haven't empowered that at all.
Now, Tim, in that, the psychology as well, there's also, we'll go to Simon Sinek's The Why, right? The purpose. And you spoke about how important that is. If the seller knows why we're doing these things, perhaps that's the big change agent. Talk about the importance of the